I'll just start. My name's Elizabeth Wallace, and I've been working for 20 years with my HOA, either as board member or on the landscape committee. And my HOA is large. I don't know. It's 700 homes, so pretty big. It's out in Portola Hills. That's a picture of one of our slopes. We were, Portola Hills was this beautiful natural area that they graded in the foothills. We're across the street from Cook's Corner. And so we have acres and acres of manufactured slopes that were planted 35 years ago with eucalyptus, peppers, acacia, shiny xylosma, And so for 20 years, I've been slowly integrating natives. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. Yeah. Okay. So just a quick overview. What is an HOA board? It's the smallest form of government. It's our neighbors. They're just volunteers. And they're managing all the problems in the neighborhood. And their demands, like now the homeowners are going to be even more afraid of fire. And so they have to juggle a lot besides having full-time jobs and having their families. So if you're on a landscape committee, you can help them, just offer to go in to help and take a little of the burden off of them. Also, in the case of my HOA, the landscape is the highest budget. You should know your budget. You should really be familiar with it. And I wanted just to talk about this. This is a slope. It's overlooking El Toro Road. It's a nice freestanding prickly pear cactus here. But above it is the irrigated area that OCFA requires. And this plant is called Teca Maria capensis. It's the landscape contractor's favorite plant. It's everywhere. And I've been working with Sylvester with Park West for 20 years, and I respect them a lot. Park West, they're designers and they're arborists. So a couple of weeks ago, Sylvester said to me about Teca Maria, he said, he's a good plant. He does his job. And I'm like, I have to respect that. Teca Maria crawls along. If you have really steep slopes, it holds the soil. It stays green. It flowers practically year round. But you don't want it everywhere, right? Oops. Oh, it's the down arrow. Okay. There's a picture of, all these pictures are recent. When I knew I was going to do this presentation, I walked and took photos, and I haven't seen this area of my community in a few years because I've been working on so many other areas. And this slope is adjacent to Whiting Regional Park. It's the HOA common area, and the homeowner up there is wanting to protect their view. So they topped the oak tree, and they cut down 2 sycamore trees, and they planted invasive pride of Madeira. So I saw that, I took a picture, and as I'm walking the slope, I'm like, I gotta get back over here. And one of the things that I always do on the landscape committee is we get rid of invasive plants. I mean, that happens. Park West has literally repelled on some of our steep slopes to remove fountain grass. So we'll get this part of Madeira out. And then I'll put in prickly pear cactus and celia, something more appropriate whenever I am near Whiting. I will not let non-native plants go in. So here's the opportunity, right, to help. If you know a little bit about native plants, if you know a little bit about design, then you can join the landscape team and encourage them to install natives. So we see that we planted these toy islands, and this is another giant hill. We have to look at the V ditches and make sure they're clean. But you see pines and eucalyptus in the background. I've never really told the board that they know I'm the president of the Native Plant Society. But I'm really careful with my language and very diplomatic. And I always tell them natural plants, or I always end, after I walk and we see all the problems in the neighborhood, I write up a report with my recommendations. At the end of the report, I say, thank you for helping us have a safe and healthy landscape. And so I just trying to work cooperatively with them and improve the community as much as I can. And it's the least favorite thing I do, because you often have to deal with bullies, and I go to those HOA meetings, and I have sleepless nights. People have said, one person said, those trash bushes, they were talking about toy-ons, and I died a little bit inside about that. So this is just what we're up against, but it's worth staying with it. And this is Robert. He's my tree guy. He's an arborist, and he's taking a picture of an eucalyptus behind these oaks and toy-ons. We walk together every month. We enjoy it together, and we look as a team. We use put our heads together and try to solve the problems around the neighborhood. You have to listen, mostly listen. I don't lecture, I don't educate, because everyone's too intensely have their personal interests. So, and I really talked with the contractor to Park West. I asked them, now we're trying this shrub, how's it working? And they're like, wow, we love it. Or I don't want to plant it anymore. So we'll talk about that. So here's a case study. 20 years ago, the slope failed. And I was on the board. I didn't know much about native plants at that time. And we had to replant that whole slope. It's a big one. You can't tell by this picture. It also is adjacent to whiting. So the landscaper suggested acacia redolence. And I just intuitively, I was like, no, I don't want to put that in. I thought it was a fire danger for some reason. I never tried, but so I ran a tree of life. Thank you, Jeffrey. And I asked him what I should plant. So we ended up with this palette of Bacchus pilularis, pigeon point, Insilia, and toyon. Back then, Park West had never planted toyons. So we bring in these 1 gallon toyons, and they're planting them like 2 feet apart, right? I have never told them how to plant. I just don't go that far. But I will call out plants, and they'll put them in. So what they learned was they love toyon, and they love Bacchus. And they've started installing it in other communities. So you can see this is whiting here in the foreground with the sumacs. The slope's bigger than you think, but it's 20 years old, and it's really looking good. However, Park West told me 3 weeks ago, we don't like Bacchus anymore. And I was like, okay, all right, why not? And they said because it's not living long enough, when it dies out, I can't cut it back and have it grow back. And what's kind of miraculous to me is this slope is 20 years old. It's working. When that Bacchus dies, we'll replace it with prickly pear, probably, and more Insilia. But that's not that costly. Like the biggest budget item for HOA is cutting trees down. Replacing a shrub is not that costly. But this is a picture of only 10-year-old Bacchus. This is the Lake Forest Sports Park. And this is what Park West is starting to experience. Right. So what do you have? A huge monoculture of Bacchus, right? And what do we have? These commercial industrial landscapes with pepper trees and everything else. It's this cold, lonely world. Like, I think native plants, they don't want to just be 100 macros. They need more care. So, but what I do and walk at the Lake Forest Sports Park, because they pull all this beautiful nature down to build the baseball fields, and I think they were trying to make amends. They put in oaks and redbuds and toyons and some ceanothus. So I've been walking there regularly to see how the natives are faring. They're generally doing pretty well, but the fact is, it is not. Here's another case study. The board asked me that this year they want to freshen the corners. So I was like, all right. What they wanted was petunias and like plants that die and you have to replace them every 3 months. So I was like, okay. We had planted there. They were just horticultural shrubs there. Whatever, just these kind of green bushes. So I suggested ivy geranium and iceberg roses because they never die. I work at another big place called Vera's Sanctuary, and there's ivy geraniums and iceberg roses that were like abandoned for 2 years, never watered or cared for. So we thought that'd be great, and then we called out Cleveland sage up at the top. But this happens, you know, on landscape committee, everyone knows they will put in something different. So Park West put in that Salvia leucantha because it performs for them, right? And you know, the board was so happy. They just thought this was such a great improvement. We did up here is a sycamore, a native sycamore. We were able to take a pepper out and get a native sycamore in there. So here it is from afar. You see the turf. This turf will stay because the Boy Scouts put benches with cement foundations, so it becomes functional turf. That's the reason we put the sycamore in, because it will get enough water. But what surprised me when I went there to take pictures for this presentation is the love. I was just like surrounded by hummingbirds, and I saw roadrunners. I expected it to just be kind of dead and quiet, but there were a lot of bees too. And I think, you know, you can see there's Pecomaria back here. I've been planting oaks over the past 20 years. There's a giant, like 100 toyons back there. So you have to compromise. Or I do anyway, I compromise. I can't be a purist. I don't think, if I couldn't put buckwheat there because the fire authority doesn't like buckwheat, you know, and so this was my solution. Oops. The last case study for you, recent. OCFA told us to take out our acres and acres of acacia redolence, and we could not afford it. So a board member and some residents hustled, and they created a nonprofit called the California Sustainability Group, and they invited other associations to join to take out what it says 22 acres of acacia redolence. So what do they call it on our sign? Hazardous fuel. I just wish plants, you know, like a couch is hazardous fuel. You know, plants are the foundation of all life, especially native plants. That language just bothers me. But that's the sign. We were awarded from CAL FIRE $3 million. And right now, Park West is just stripping acacia, and we have to replace it with plants that only grow 2 feet tall. And, you know, one of the many challenges in a big association like mine is that you have people that you can't put plants in that go dormant. what they call it, the browning, Park West calls it the browning, if the plants die if they don't water them, so they water all summer long, which is hard on natives. So we're putting in some low horticultural plants, but I'm intermixing it with these beautiful groups of prickly pear cactus and sugar bush and toyons and oaks. So, again, compromising. We're also using coffee berry in the shade. This is I'm almost finished. That is acacia redlands, a sea of it along the street. It grows 6 feet tall. But thanks to Jonathan Frank, I asked him about, what I should try to plant in HOAs, and he suggested the California ash. So this is California ash tree growing here. And Park West said, okay, we'll try it. It's Fraxinus digitala, is that how you say it? And boy, everyone loves it. Park West loves it, and it's doing fine. We'll be removing this acacia next year, and we'll be able to plant some better plants there to go along with them. But we took some eucalyptus trees down, and the Park West guys, they're designers, and they do people's private yards too, and they're like taking note. That's a good tree. For us in Portola Hills, for me as a landscape person, I'm lucky because it's almost all slope. So when they're watering twice a week in the summer, it's running off, right? It's not killing the plants too badly. So, okay. This is my last slide. These are native plants that work. So here's a hill, like another manufactured slope with an old coastside oak, and next to a house. But we've got toyons and a sumac and sugar bush growing in there. Park West loves planting Pittosporum under oaks, which is so awful. And but the homeowners demand plants everywhere. I'm thinking now with the fires, I keep trying to tell the board, having space between plants is more fire safe. So I'm hoping that I can, we can not jam millions of shrubs in all the time. But this is my list of plants that are working. I just called out some scrub oak, and it didn't make a proposal, so Sylvester will say, I can't find, like, he cannot find San Diego marsh elder, Iva Caesiana, which I was really looking forward to planting a lot of, and they can't find it. When I said, all right, let's try Catalina currant in the shade, when I tell them the specific, you must tell them the scientific name, or they will put something else in. They just, Ribes viburnifolium is just such a big word, and they're not familiar with it, and they're reluctant to install. But you just gotta keep asking, let's just experiment. Let's just do it on a small scale and see how it does. And they're willing to do that. We also have planted a lot of, not a lot, but quite a bit of Joyce Coulter ceanothus and Yankee Point ceanothus, Pacific mist manzanita, but I was with Sylvester again lately, and he said, "Oh, Yankee Point, he doesn't like water." It's just like, that's right. So what kind of amazes me is I'll put in these plants and I'll just like cross my fingers and turn my back and pray that they're gonna do well, and then I'll go back a year later and go, oh my God, this slope is so beautiful, with the ceanothus and the deer grass, and it's so fresh. Other times I'll put it in and it all dies, and now that slope is all Teca-Maria, so it is not easy, but it's worth it to try to influence the trade, to try to bring life to your community. So that's the end of mine, and I'm going to introduce Jeffrey Olmstead, he has the opposite story.
All right, hey guys, so I did a project here in the colony club, Riverside. So a long time, a neighbor, we're talking about doing a project, she's the head of the garden committee, right? So we want to do a project for our neighbors in the neighborhood. So we had to figure out how to go about doing that, so we have to find a site, compose a site. Come up with a concept plan, educate the board members as to why we want to do this and all these other things. We were very fortunate to have several gardeners on the board. That was very helpful. Figure out how much it costs, how much they want to spend, where the money comes from. We're very lucky, there's grass rebate. And since our neighborhood is not using reclaimed water, we can use the grass rebate. So it's very helpful for us. Gaining approval is basically going through all these steps and can get there. And then time, the grass rebate has a time scale, you have to use it within and all these other details, so figuring out the time scale is very important on these types of projects. The other questions are, who's the designer? I designed this particular yard, I did the design on, but you're actually might want an actual designer. Who's installing it? We did most of the work ourselves, but you know, we had a contractor help with the DG and other stuff on this particular site. Care, me and my neighbor do the care currently, but other neighborhoods probably would be okay with that, we find, you know, like Elizabeth has, a contractor to do that. Next things, challenges. Irrigation is my biggest nemesis, so our contractor does all the lawn stuff, or our old one. They are constantly contacting, please adjust the sprinklers, please adjust, they wouldn't do it. We finally have a new contractor and they're finally doing it, but the edges, I'm constantly losing plants. So that's a big challenge for sure. Damage by contractors, they dump soil in them, damaging, you know, the bases of the plants, they don't care. Residents don't do too much damage, fortunately, like there's a basketball court there, you see some damage from the balls hitting plants on occasion, but mostly people are respectful, it's pretty nice. And then we spend a lot of time educating and building interest with residents, right? So when I'm out there caring, I interact with people, and I have done several talks amongst the community to try to get them more involved in, you know, this garden, see why, the hows and whys, and why we do this. So that's a big thing as well, and it can be challenging, you know, people like my neighborhood's an old neighborhood with, you know, older residents and involved and interested. So how did I pick my plants? I was kind of trying to think of who's caring for it, all these other details, or how long could I be caring for it. So ease of care is important, right? Well, stuff that's not too hard for people to care for. Toughness, you know, it's by a basketball court, dogs walk through there and probably walk through it, markets, scratch it up, all that fun stuff. So the edges are definitely more robust species selections. Evergreen or not, you know, most people like evergreen stuff. I did put, you know, some seasonality there. I put a couple of summer deciduous, a couple winter deciduous in there, just to give them the taste of actual seasonality. And then, you know, flowers and pretty stuff, you know, you want to provide them some pretty pops of things. It may not be the highest habitat value, but at least it gives people more visual interest, get more involved. And then habitat value is my big thing, you know, I want high value species in the space. And that was, you know, a definitely important thing for me personally. Water requirements, you know, I'm next to turf areas all around here. Some areas I'm looking at a sidewalk between the turf, and other areas I'm right up against it. So I need to figure out the watering and water needs. So I did put a lot of island species. Those can handle usually a little bit more moisture, I find, in other gardens. So that's why I've stuck along this one, you know, a lot of the edges is a lot of island plants. So there's a short list of some species I threw in there, just basic ideas, a lot of just pretty green flowery stuff that doesn't die easy. You know, you don't want to put like a ton of like meaningless out there, right? Those usually last one season. For a lot of people, it can be a little challenging. So here's some photos of it after it's installed. A little ways in. So this site is literally potter's clay. You can throw a pot in the fire, no problem with this material. And I was never expecting the swale I designed in there to fill with any water ever, because there's no roof drain to it, but the last 2 years, it's been a swamp. So it's been a fun challenge. So how to achieve success, right? So we need to actually build community engagement and get people involved, right? So we proposed another project to expand this across the way from it. And in that process, we sent out a mailing voting, form for the residents. And we actually had 2/3 of the people that actually returned the ballots were interested in expanding. The number one challenge was nobody wanted to fund it. We found, which is, it makes sense. I get it. The things are tight. So, we do have support our neighborhood, and I think I feel it's because we have been working hard educating all this stuff, right? Education, there we go, give talks. I've been doing about 3 or 4 talks a year by this garden on, plant care or selections. The subjects change a lot. What I do is, and sometimes I'll give away plants, I usually get 15 people show up, and that's great, I'll take that any day. Of course, offer gifts, like, if I'm out there putting plants, I give people, piece of Lemonchini fragrance or something like that, like, hey, look, this is a beautiful plant, smells good, easy to grow, put in your garden, have fun with it. And then offer ways to connect with the plants, right? Show them what's on the plants, what's using the plants, all these other things, right? And just create a space people want to be. So we did put a little bench out there. It's not my favorite type of bench, but it's a bench. I'll take it. And of course, now it's bringing in a lot of wildlife. I've been seeing a lot of species find the space, and hopefully people are slowing down and noticing the small little pollinators and everybody going through there. I hope. And then now we're on here. I guess.
Hi, my name is Karen, and I am the newest person working with my HOA. I've learned a lot from Olmstead. I live in the Deerfield community, Irvine, pretty close to Jeffrey, about less than 2 miles away from each other probably. And this is my community. This is one of the projects that we're working on, and I'll show a picture of that a little bit later. So I started, I've been living in my home for about 10 years, and I bought my home almost 2 years ago. And I put land stewardship begins at home because we really started transforming our home as a renter, and then even more when we bought our home. We removed the front and back turf, removed trees, and installed native plants. And then I have Shane Brown here, who is a friend of mine, and she is responsible for installing all the rain gardens and all the native plants in the front and back. And so we really have been, of course, enjoying all this going on in our house. And we started noticing, my family started noticing this huge increase in biodiversity in my home. And of course, these are pictures that my husband took of some of the plants, and the western bluebird there, the fledgling on the lupin. And I started wondering, looking around the community where I live, where there's not a single California native plant around in my community. And I started wondering where these guys are going when they leave my house. And I would say, just go to Jeffrey's, it's not that far. It's not miles there, and you can go to the birthday sure down the street, but it really made me think about, what's my responsibility as a resident, and not just a landowner, but someone who lives and supports biodiversity. And it really was my responsibility to reach out to my community and try to get some education or some change happening in my HOA. And around the same time, I met Elizabeth and started just, throwing questions at her. She was probably thinking, who is this person texting me all the time? And I reached out to my HOA. I happened to know a gentleman that was on the HOA board. And I said, why are there native plants in our community? And he said, well, why don't you come to a HOA board meeting and just sit and listen. And so I went to my HOA board meeting and, I suddenly became, on the architectural landscaping committee. It's strange, you happen to be on that committee and someone had just resigned, like the week before. And so afterwards, suddenly they were voting me in and I was on the architectural landscaping committee. Which was fine because I really believed in this cause and I started attending the board meetings, which were very intimidating. People had very strong opinions. My husband was like, are you crazy? What are you doing right now? But like I said, I felt like I really had a responsibility to this land and I started listening and Elizabeth gave me good advice to just say, just listen, see what their needs are, don't come on too strong, even though you're thinking all these things and you have these plans, really listen and see where they are. So I joined the architectural landscaping committee and I started attending these monthly landscaping walks, seeing what was going on in my community, listening and earning their trust because they didn't know who I was. And I slowly started educating them about native plants, very, very tenderly, like for Elizabeth's advice. And I offered to help with the projects that we're currently doing. When I came on board, one of the things they were doing was removing non-functional turf. They were getting rebates for removal of non-functional turf along deer fields. And where they were is they were installing Mediterranean non-native plants. And they were very proud of this. It was a big deal for them, it was edgy for my community, for those board members. It felt like a big deal, And as we were walking through and I saw the rosemary and all the other things, like they're like, we have native plants here, and I just really had to, just listen, like what you said, just listen, see what they're doing. And I learned a lot. They were removing sprinklers, they were installing drips. They weren't quite saving money with irrigation yet, so I still had to watch and see what was going on, and there were a lot of pros and cons with what they were doing. They were removing the turf. A lot of people thought it was ugly. They didn't like the big spaces with the mulch. It was really different for a lot of people, but they were headed in the right direction. And so I started guiding them a little bit towards California native plants. And just doing it for you. It's really what it feels like. And just listening to their needs and what they felt was important. This is kind of a generalization of what I heard a lot. I really wanted to understand what they wanted out of the plants. They didn't want any messy plants, they wanted any more sycamores. They were taking out sycamores because they were having problems with the so they also believe plants should always be green, not anything that went dormant. Neatness, incredibly important. I really checked my next door to get a feel for what they felt too. And really neatness important. They were very worried about invasive roots. They kept using that word with the trees. When you're going to put a tree in, they really wanted to consult with arborists because they really wanted to make sure that they're not going to be invasive to homes nearby. Big spaces around plants look bad. They want size. They needed a lot of education with how big the plant is going to grow because they wanted to pack in plants tightly, which they did with that Mediterranean palette, and some died. And Elizabeth gave me so much advice with, spacing. I really researched how big the plant was going to grow, and I would write detailed notes and give it to the landscapers that were contracted with, did a lot of research. They also thought that all Mediterranean plants were native, and they really like birds and butterflies, which most people do. And so I really went off on that. Oops. So I also am part of the Southern California Bluebird Club. I'm a monitor in my park. and I wanted the nest boxes in there. And the board really wanted to know how to get more bluebirds. In fact, some of them wanted to know if they could put one of those boxes in their yard, and they would just come. And they also wanted to know how to get more butterflies. And so I went through that door. I said, well, actually, there is a way that you could get more bluebirds to come and, you know, and more butterflies. And I started getting them interested in the California plant palette that way. I was very patient and frustrated sometimes because it took a long time. And again, Elizabeth would tell me it's okay. I almost quit once and I was just like, nothing's happening. And I actually said to one of my board members, like, nothing's happening. They said, it's okay, well, just give it time. This one, I said, carry a clipboard and act confident. People will take you seriously. Which, you know, I carried that clipboard, had my notes, and it really looked like I knew what I was talking about. People believed I did, even though I didn't most of the time. And I also learned that people may look at your own yard to judge your expertise. When I started working with my HOA, I started looking at my yard a little differently and putting a little more of the edgy plants and keeping them in the back, and also putting some evergreens in the front. And we kind of chose things a little bit differently in the front to make it look a little more intentional. Because I knew that people were walking by, and I saw some of them walk by and look, and were judging my yard and my expertise based on it. So my front yard, I kind of we changed a few things with that. And also, we figured out what they felt was important and went through that door. So I also started writing some articles for the HOA just to get some community outreach. Our HOA, most HOAs have quarterly newsletters that come out, and they have paper newsletters that come out. And so I said, how do I get an article in there? How can I talk to my community about these bluebirds that they really like? And so I wrote an article about the bluebirds and what I do in the park, and I introduced the plant palette that I proposed down here. And I talked a little bit about how, as a bluebird monitor, I noticed that there were a lot of carrotwood seeds in some of the nests, and that I had several nestlings die from all the wet, you know, droppings from the carrotwood tree because there were not enough insects in my community. And so they started looking for berries, and so they go to the non-native carrotwood and they feed them to their babies, and they go through them too fast. And I found out in my club meetings that this is a very common problem. And if only we had toyon in our community, or we had more plants that create more insects for these birds, then we could have more bluebirds. And my husband was out gardening a couple weeks ago, and a woman walked by and said, oh, I'm planting some natives in my yard too. And she said, I read this article the other day that if you plant natives, it supports bluebirds. And my husband said, how do I prove that? And so I was like, oh wow, somebody's actually reading this. It made me feel, it was good. All right, so the installation plan. So I'm at the very beginning, gone through lots of back and forth, a lot of work creating the plant palette with Elizabeth's support. And so this is where the next project, oops. Oh geez, okay, this is the next project, and they're removing this big piece of turf right here. And it goes back really far, and then all this is being removed. And they basically let me take the plans. They were very generous, and this is the new, this is the first round of installation that's going to be installed there. You know, there has been a lot of back and forth, and with creating this plant palette, I've worked with Harvest Landscapers on the placement because they like to crowd the plants. And so we have a lot of plants that they can crowd because they want to do that. They don't want to look spacing. And then I've also given some that they can put mulch and put different plants with different spacing there. The timeline's been kind of a challenge, but it's happening. The challenges that I've had is earning the trust of the HOA board. They're suspicious at first, you know, like, what is this person doing here? But I took the advice of just listening and slowly, you know, educating as they got to know me. Sourcing plants, they want to purchase the plants through Harvest Landscaping Committee because they're insured. And so they are having some trouble finding some of the plants. But I told them if they couldn't, of course, I'm gonna from sheer life and go get them and store them, but they're not insured, so that's been challenging. Because then if they die, you're taking a risk. The spacing, they oftentimes, switch plants out on the palette, so I do look really carefully to the scientific names. And then there have been changes in the plan, so a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of misconceptions about California native plants, so a lot of education, people think that they're always yellow and they're always messy, there's a long way to go, but I'm starting with a really non-edgy palette that they feel comfortable with. But we didn't put sagebrush, you start with something easy and, hopefully those misconceptions will fall away over time. And the challenge is, I'm on the architectural landscape district, and so I have to do a lot of approving of solar panels and painting and gates and things I don't know anything about. But I'm there because I care about the native plants, and it's a lot. It's worth it, and I still have so much to learn. So there's that.
Go Karen. I have to say, my boards have switched so many times, some boards loved me, I'd be able to write the newsletter, this board, they don't agree with each other, and I just waiting for something to change. So I'm really impressed that Karen can begin that education, good job. So I just wanted to let you know, these are resources, let's see, we have a list of the plants on our OC CNPS website, gardening page that work in HOAs if you can get them. I wrote a blog article about working with HOAs. I pinned it to the top of the blog, so it's right there. If you can get out invasive species, that's a great way to start. You can, I also, here's my email, call me. I'll help you as best I can. I wanted to show you on the slide, this is again, that's El Toro Road, but down right here is Saddleback Meadows is proposed for that piece of land right there. So it's in the county, they have conditional whatever. OCCMPS has written a very good letter, proposing it, asking for new environmental studies, but, right there in the fire, we're in the wind corridor. So it's just not a good idea. But I just want to say, you can make progress. Even with Karen, who's still learning scientific names, you just start, introduce yourself and listen and try to understand what the board is going through, and the landscape contractors end up loving working with you. So because I take responsibility a little bit off their shoulders. So now, what time? We wanted to leave. I wanted to say Andrew Kane and Leslie Bindglass are here today too, and they work with their Tolega HOA. So we have some people doing some good stuff. And so we want to just open it up to questions. If anyone's tried it, or if you have any successes or failures you want to share. Yes,
I
right.
just had a question about the project that you described in this picture here.
Right here.
Yeah. Or not Saddleback Meadows, but the HOA.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I've been driving by there, seeing that acacia getting taken out.
Mhm.
It looked like they are planting that Tecna Maria.
Right. That's everywhere, right? I mean, that turtle rack is covered with Teca. So where you're seeing it, that's Portola 1. I don't work with them, that's not my HOA. So, Park West is just putting in whatever they're gonna put in. Yes, fine.
Do you influence them or do you have issues about when they plant?
That's a very good question. Actually, a couple summers ago, we installed a lot of oaks and sycamores and elderberries. And most of them did pretty well, but it just wasn't a good idea. So they won't install if I don't tell them to. So it's easy to control when things get installed. Yeah. I was just kind of being greedy. And then. So, yeah, but it generally was good, yes.
I think that they're never concerned about this.
Yes. We actually will tell you,
But now that there's.
oh, right, with homeowners, right? I was talking with Tom Eastman here tonight from the water district. Actually, we did a water assessment with the Irvine Ranch Water District, our board did, and they're like, why are you checking with us? We're doing great. You know, they thought we were doing great. And one of the reasons I want to put in natives is to reduce our water use. So, it's an issue. And it's complicated. Tom, go ahead.
I just want to point out that there's restrictions on how much potable water you can use for irrigation, but there's no restriction for recyclable water. So that encourages people to switch over to recyclable, and then they think, hey, we can use as much as we want. Even if it's not beneficial to the plant, they're gonna use more water they can, because there's no restriction.
Yeah, it's true.
And you can't, we will say, can you water every other day? No, you can't do that.
Yeah.
But as an agency, we're, throughout the state had restrictions on how much you can water. And we were supposed to be coming back to twice a week, or once a week. And non-functional turf was not allowed at all. The city did a point. We were fighting on good and nail because they, well, we have to keep this. And the restriction, you had water after 5 p.m. before 9 a.m. Unless you were adjusting the trigger. So they would have somebody go out and adjust the sprinklers every day. Turn them on, sit in the truck for 15 minutes and go back and turn them off. You know, sometimes different agencies just will not work together. You can't change that mindset. They put a picnic bench in an island because it was harassing the island. That was not watering yet. They put a picnic bench. Hey, that's not functional. So I could walk across the street, sit on a picnic bench and watch traffic go up. But.
I'm kind of proud of where it Portola too. We had almost no turf, except that one I showed you. Yes, we did. Right, right. Oh, so you're just a lot of non-functional, all non-functional turf.
Yeah, and are there any? I didn't think down. The fact that I'm native.
There are, let's have someone from the audience answer that, yeah. What would you say would be the native ground cover?
Depends on the same conditions. Depends what you're looking for. So if you want something, if it's like a sunny spot, you know, I still love like salvia. There's like, you know, jade carpet is great. If you're somewhere more inland, beachless is really nice as well. With a really nice little water salvia. Or you can go with no factors in point. Wow, there's a lot of nice little lines spread out.
What about those grass alternatives or those little?
Yeah, those are good too, yeah.
Carrots, yeah, those are great.
Elizabeth,
Yes, some.
can you repeat the questions so that the people on Zoom can hear as well?
Absolutely. So this question was about, one of the homeowners lives in a, where there's non-functional turf all over their HOA in the gal. And so it's being walked on, we're trying to talk about what is a walkable grass alternative. The carrots is a sedge. I love carrots. I think it's a great HOA plant. It's hard to keep the weeds out when it's first installed, but it's beautiful. And yarrow, I've seen it planted in a water district wherever I was somewhere. It's like, God, look at that gorgeous, yarrow. And Tom, yes.
There's a couple of loopholes to the non-functional turf. If it's water with recycled water, it's not exempt, it's exempt. And if there are trees, you are allowed to water to preserve the tree.
Yeah. It does, the trees need water, right? I guess one thing I also love about my Park West guy, Sylvester, is he is so good with water. I mean, yes, they water once or twice a week in the summer, yeah, but he's really efficient. That's the other thing, when you're on a landscape committee, you walk around and I'm squishing and I'm like, dude, these sprinklers are flooding here, fix this today. That's really important that you're on that committee and that you help put eyes on, we found 2 sprinkler issues, and then I'm like, look, what is that brown shrub up there? He's like, oh, that's Teca Maria. It's not getting any water. Like, wow, I think you can kill Teca Maria. It's probably rebounded since they fixed its sprinklers. Okay, so.
We have a question in the chat. Arlette Lyman is asking, is mulch good for natives, cacti, and succulents? If so, what is the best type? Also, is mulch flammable?
Okay, I was gonna say the fire authority does not like mulch. No, I actually asked that of Sylvester, can we put some mulch in? And he's like, the fire authority doesn't like it. So it is good. It is good for cactus and succulents. I have read that an inch of mulch is fire safe. The property that I'm totally in charge of, I am not mulching until fire season is over, and maybe it never will be this year. But leaf litter is the best mulch, and where I live in a wildland interface, unfortunately I have to just clean it. I leave an inch of it, and sometimes you can bury it, or I'll put it in my compost. If it buries, I'll move it down the street. But leaf litter is really important. It's full of critters, it's full of life. Butterflies lay their eggs on the leaves fall, and then the larvae eat the leaves. So that's another subject. Okay, I hope I answered that. Yeah, and Tree of Life, by the way, they have very specific mulch, the kind of mulch that's good, chunky mulch, right? You don't want that shredded stuff. So yes, Victoria.
The Laura.
Yes, that's it. How do you spell that? Be nice and loud.
It's HYLA. And then NODIFM.
And that's the Dan, would you say that's a little round number? And it has flowers, right? Mhm.
And it planted it there. Yeah, and I saw dogs. Just across.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is native,
Dan,
but I
would
think
you
it's
say
kind
it
of
loud?
PHYLA, not a flora, NODIFLORA. Mhm.
It does have flowers and she's like it, so if you're barefoot, it's on that.
Very good point, but it's still a great ground cover.
I bought 2 flats at Lowe's.
At Lowe's.
At Lowe's.
Yes.
Bro, that
See,
can't
and
be
that
real.
is.
Where is it from?
Into our.
Suspicious.
But I think we have a garden on the tour this year, we have 10 gardens. One of them's at Philo, not a Flora lawn, I believe. Yeah.
Just that comment that, in Riverside, the Resource Conservation District out there, they have an office, they have a place they call the what's it called? The Land Use Learning Center.
Mhm.
And they have an educational display of all the turf replacements, like the pila, the sedges, all the different ones. So, really good.
Yeah, we could use that here. We need to do that. Yes, then.
Arlette has another question from the chat. Now that Tree of Life is closing, is there a replacement somewhere else? Best place to find natives? Question mark. I did refer her to Calscape.
Okay, I'm gonna hand that to Jeffrey. Like we said earlier, we talked about.
Okay, so there's lots of other good nurseries here about southern, Southern California. You do have, California nursery up in Long Beach. They're starting up. They're doing really good work. You do still have Theodore Payne. You do still have Grow Native out in Claremont. You do have down south. You do have Neal's. You do have Moosehead who supplies other nurseries. And you do have Natives West. But yeah, there's places to get plants, and I'm hoping a lot of people get together and starting small grow operations to keep things going. Even like our local colleges, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff at where you work too, right? And so,
But it's not, yeah, to have a big place that is that lovely spot where it's relatively close, but it's far enough out, you're not in the city. And it takes such a sincere interest in natives.
big lots.
Yeah, you're not, that's not the easy place.
Jeffrey, I have a question for you. The Tree of Life supply Tucker Wildlife Sanctuary, and are they growing their own there in the Jesta? Because they're selling natives. And
They have their own. They have their own nursery.
They go to their own, and Fullerton College is planting. Yes.
So there are still nurseries close by that you can get any of the plants from, but it's still really important that if you are gonna go on a trip to Armstrong Gardens or Lowe's or Home Depot or Rogers Gardens, that you mention that they're looking for California native plants, because we need to let them know that there is a demand for these plants. Previously, there hasn't been as big of a demand, and they've been harder to find from local growers. But if people continue asking their local nurseries for more native plants, that can lead to change eventually. It also depends on who's working at those local nurseries. So certain Armstrong Gardens, certain locations will have a bigger amount of native plants available, just because there's people working at those stores that are showing them off and selling them a little bit better. So if you're telling them, if you're going in and telling them that that's what you want, it'll increase demand, and they'll start hopefully having more if they can find them.
I'm headed to you.
And but is there, what's gonna happen when Tree of Life is gone? Is there gonna be another place? There's not. Tree of Life is visual, and there's not gonna be, they're gonna shut down. A month later, there's gonna be another, 7-acre nursery that's selling homemade native plants. It's not gonna happen. But in the meantime, we really wanna change and get more native plants in the landscape. It's gonna be getting it into the Armstrongs, it's gonna be getting it into the Home Depots, into the roads. We're all shopping at Tree of Life. We're already converted. Your neighbors aren't wandering by and dropping into Tree of Life yet. So we've got to get native plants out into the mainstream and get it out of the little hobby 1% world and get it into the bigger world. And the way to do that is exactly what Katie just said, is go into your garden centers where you're in that section. they're business people, they're gonna respond to that. And you know, where, you know, I want to maybe Cleveland State, where is it? And if they say, well, you know, you have to shop somewhere else. Then. And that will change. Being in the landscape, in the nursery industry, native plant sales are growing. Even though we're losing tree of life, because the big corporate growers are starting to include more native plants in their pallets, in their grows. They're not native plant only growers, and they're not, aren't gonna be a lot more native plant only retailers. But native plants as a total are growing. And, you know, you can now find native plants that aren't shown, you can find them private, you can find them a little bit, depot, others in there, which is starting. But it's happening because you're asking for it. If you keep asking for it, the growers will respond, the marketplace will respond, and we will survive. But it's bringing native plants out of a hobbyist mentality and getting it out into, this is just good garden. It's just good use of our open spaces and our open natural resources and so on. And that's like getting it past our thinking and in the room next to it. They're not thinking about native plants. They're thinking about, you know, cooking, whatever they're doing over there. So, so bring this thing to the other versions, bring it out into the landscape, bring it to your neighbors and do it that, but I'm gonna miss tree life, but we will, you know, live on it. And it's the nursery industry that needs to hear from you.
And more HOAs that have native plantings will encourage more homeowners in those HOAs to plant natives.
And I just want to add that, Yvonne, I'll get to you. I'm lazy, tree of life is a long drive for me, so I go down to Green Thumb and I ask them, I'm like, there's some Loser Creek brings natives to Green Thumb on El Toro Road in the freeway. And I do ask them, I want this, I can't find what, you know, you need to get this for me. That's what I do. Yes, fine.
Maintenance
Yes. Okay.
and is a real, once you get it into a public space, maintenance is a real issue. Which also leads you to the landscapers, generally, landscapers using this either in conjunction with other plants that they're using in the Mediterranean setting. But training, it's a huge barrier. The use of getting the plants really out there, people being satisfied, is because they don't understand the maintenance, let alone getting them to wait 3 years for the plant to really perform for them.
And what is it? Perfect, perfection. So that's why Jeffrey is so careful picking his palette, and Karen too, and me too. But with Devil Mountain, there was an Engelmann oak growing and it was getting flooded and dying, and I pulled the tag off of it and it was Devil Mountain Wholesale Nursery. They're carrying a lot more natives, and that's who HOAs are going for. Oh, yes.
What is your opinion of pulling out healthy non-native plants that replacement?
I fully support that. The question was, what is your opinion of pulling out healthy non-native plants and replacing with native? I support it. I mean, you have, if it's an HOH standpoint, you must watch the budget. And things are dying, you know, the horticulture plants are dying, so there's always a chance to slip some natives in. You don't have to.
I'm doing that without permission.
Urban gardening.
Only about 30 of them.
Yeah, and maintenance with contractors, it is an issue, but they learn, I mean, like Sylvester, like, he doesn't like water, you know, I mean, they are learning and they love the plants, they really do. So you have to have faith. Any other questions? This has been a great discussion tonight. Yeah, yes.
Okay, so, the second housing tract that was built by the Irvine Company is University Park. And Village 1 and 2 are controlled by the UCA Homeowners Association, which had a tree and landscape committee, which I was chair of for about 15 years. I'm still on the committee. Okay, so, so another commercial association. And yes, I've been trying to get them to adopt native plants, and they've experimented with it for a while. We had part left for a while, and then the chairman of the board got on their nerves and they quit. So we have another landscape vendor. So we've had a number of different landscape vendors. Mostly it's the same board. It's the same people year after year. So I've had experiences with a lot of problems. Well, a lot of conceptual problems, more than you have time to respond to, I bet. So let me just pick one random. This would be for all of you when we're talking. How do you deal with the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Talk to me more about that.
It's a psychological phenomenon. It says that the less you know about a subject, the more convinced you are that your knowledge is sufficient.
Love that. That is everyone. That's everyone. Yeah, he said
Every single board
Yeah,
member.
yes, yes. And Leslie can attest, she's heard me complaining about my work right now. What is it called? The
Dunning-Kruger.
Dunning-Kruger. Yes. Every human being believes they're right. And you have to respect that. Because maybe they are. So you just listen, let them talk, let them process and help them. It's just diplomacy, and that's part of it. Your language is so important. So,
Now play the game.
yeah.
And
It's just,
low.
yeah, but it's basic relationship, 101, respect them. They have a lifetime of experience that's created their knowledge, and right or wrong, do we really know? I don't know, I understand your frustration though, I sit there, I don't want to sit and listen. I would rather be home with my husband. But that's what I do. And Andrew and Leslie, do you have anything to add from your Chilega standpoint?
Our HOA is, I'm not sure, I think it's like 3,500 homes or something, or at least 1,500. So we actually have like Park West, landscape contractor, but we have, liaison, I think it's called Mosaic. That's kind of like the intermediary between us and Park West, and, our landscape committee now, we have, I think, 5 members, and I think all 5 are all pro native plants. Which was different from when I started, but even when I started, we had Jody Cook on the board there, 5 or 6 years ago when I first started, so. Elizabeth, I think, and might have been like 6 years ago, she said, "Oh, get on your HOA board," and so I did, and, in Tolega, we've got some other things going on right now. But there's no doubt about it that, people are receptive to native plants, they like the idea. You talk about the water usage, we spend about $1 million a year in water. So just that alone, helps, convince people, oh, maybe we should look at less water. Plants like plant natives use less water. And then, I think, like this mosaic, I don't know who else they deal with, do you have them up there? So you don't have any.
Yeah, we have them too.
Yeah.
So getting that liaison, like on board with it is more important than probably. They're good at communicating things with Park West or Bemis or whoever you have, so, we do have quite a few, natives, throughout our community. We haven't planted anything new in a couple of years probably, because we got other things going on. But Pigeon Point doesn't do well for us. The Toyons do wonderful, they can take the water, they can take the pruning. The coffee berries, the cultivars we have, they can take the water, they can take the pruning, they do really well. We started using some beast sage, that seems to be doing pretty good. The problem is that the fire authority wants those 2-foot ground covers and. Yeah, other than maybe Beast Bliss, we're kind of at a loss of what to put on slopes that are 2-foot ground covers. So, but the last thing I'll say, compared to like 6 years ago when I got on the HOA board, I do listen more than talk. 6 years ago, I just talked. So if you do get on an HOA board, you know, you're doing it, you're getting on his board rally to try to get them to use native, which is good. But, just kind of ease your way in.
I'm really proud of everyone, because it's just got fraught with danger when you. It just is, and, but it's worth it if you, execution. So I think it's getting late, I think we should wrap it up, and thank you everybody for coming, I hope you learned a little bit, and if you need any help, just email me, I'm happy to, encourage you and help you in any way I can. Everybody.